She stood up in church and called her husband a failure. Then the pastor handed him the microphone, the air, and the redeemed souls. Community chapel was thick with the Holy Spirit and the scent of fried plantain that would follow the service. Pastor John was reaching the crescendo of his sermon, his voice a warm baritone that wrapped around the congregation. Then, a sound that did not belong, the sharp rustle of expensive George wrapper fabric. Ngozi stood up. Her shadow fell over the pew, sharp and defined. Every eye in the small, packed church in Decatur, Georgia, turned to her. Silence. Pastor John paused, his hand still raised towards heaven. He blinked, confused. This was not the time for testimonies. Pastor, Ngozi's voice cut through the sacred quiet, clear and cold as glass. Forgive me for interrupting, but I have something to say, something this whole church needs to hear about the man I call my husband. Her eyes, framed by impossibly long lashes, found her husband, Emeka, sitting alone in the third row, as he always did. She looked at him, not as a wife, but as a judge about to pass a sentence. And in that moment, the entire congregation held its breath, sensing a spirit of a different kind had just entered the room. If you believe that what is done in the dark will always find its way to the light, and that the quietest person in the room often has the most to say, then subscribe to our channel. You are about to witness a story that proves the truest wealth is not held in a bank, but in a heart that knows how to give when it has nothing left. Now let me take you back to where it all began. Emeka Okoro was a man made of quiet spaces. At 49 years old, he had the gentle, settled face of someone who had seen much of the world and decided that most of it was too loud. His skin, a deep and rich umber, seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. His hands, though soft, had the width and strength of a man who once worked with them, a history he never spoke of. He lived in a modest two-bedroom apartment in Decatur, drove a 10-year-old Toyota Camry, and found his greatest pleasure in the solitude of a long walk after the rain, when the Georgia pines smelled of home, of the damp earth of Enugu. To the world, and especially to his wife, Emeka was a man of small, quiet failures. A man who had come to America with promises in his eyes and had settled for a life of invisible, vaguely defined consulting that produced just enough to maintain their simple life, but never enough for the life Ngozi believed she was owed. He was a ghost at the feast of Atlanta's thriving Nigerian community, a man who nodded politely at parties but never spoke of his business, a man whose silence was universally mistaken for emptiness. But silence can be a vault. And inside Emeka's vault was a number so vast it was almost comical in its contrast to the worn collar of his Sunday shirt. $1.2 billion, not in flashy tech stocks or volatile crypto, but in the very bones of civilization, infrastructure, concrete, steel, and rebar. He owned silent, controlling interests in companies that built bridges in Ghana, laid fiber optic cables in Kenya, and constructed power grids in Rwanda. He was a king in a kingdom of concrete, a silent partner whose name appeared only on the most confidential of documents, a man who moved markets with a single, quiet phone call from his humble apartment. He had built this empire with a razor-sharp mind and a profound desire to remain unseen. For Emeka, the money was a tool, not an identity. It was a means to build, to connect, to empower. But in his own home, in his own life, it had built nothing but a wall of misunderstanding between him and the woman he had once loved. Ngozi, on the other hand, was a woman who lived to be seen. Her identity was a carefully curated collection of expensive objects. Her mornings did not begin with prayer, but with the ritual of assembly. Today, for church, it was a gown of emerald green Swiss lace that had cost more than their monthly mortgage, a pair of Christian Louboutin pumps that pinched her feet but announced her arrival, and a Chanel handbag, the 2.55 reissue in black quilted leather that sat in the passenger seat of her new Mercedes G-Wagon like a pampered child. Her beauty was a high-maintenance performance, from the flawless foundation that concealed her true complexion to the 24-inch Brazilian weave that cascaded down her back. She did not walk. She made an entrance. She did not speak. She issued decrees. Their mornings were a study in contrast. While Emeka sat on their small balcony, sipping his tea and watching the sun rise, lost in thought, Ngozi would be in her walk-in closet, a space larger than his home office, sighing with theatrical frustration. This Sunday morning, like so many before, the friction was palpable. Emeka was tying his simple, polished brown shoes when she swept into the living room, the scent of her Tom Ford perfume colonizing the air. "Are you really wearing that again?" she asked, her lip curled in a faint sneer. She didn't look at him, but at his reflection in the hallway mirror, as if the direct sight of him was too much to bear. "It is a good shirt, Ngozi," he said softly, his voice calm. "It is clean. It's old, Emeka. It's tired, just like everything else." She adjusted the angle of her jail, a magnificent, towering structure of fabric. "Do you know what Chidi took his wife for their anniversary? A week in Dubai, business class. He bought her a diamond necklace from a shop in the Burj Khalifa. A real diamond, not the cubic zirconia you gave me for our 10th anniversary." Emeka said nothing. He remembered that anniversary. He had saved for months from his personal allowance, a tiny fraction of his income that he allowed himself for daily life, to buy her a necklace from a local jeweler he thought she would find tasteful. She had worn it once, then it had vanished. "I see the way they look at me at these church meetings," she continued, her voice rising, "the pity in their eyes. Ah, poor Ngozi, married to the quiet one, the simple one. You don't even try, Emeka. You just sit. You exist. You are a ghost, a failure." The word hung in the air between them. Failure. It was her favorite weapon, the one she sharpened daily and used with surgical precision. He had become immune to the pain of it, but not to the sorrow. He looked at this beautiful, angry woman and saw a stranger. The girl he had met in Enugu, the one with the brilliant laugh and the ambitious fire in her eyes, was gone. Or perhaps she had never been there at all. Perhaps he had only seen what he wanted to see. He stood up. "It is time for church. You go," she said, waving a dismissive hand, heavy with gold rings. "Go and pray with the other old men. I will be along later. I need to make an appearance. People need to see that I am still trying." She meant, of course, that she didn't want to be seen arriving with him. She would drive her G-Wagon and he would take his Camry. They were two separate nations, living under a fragile, temporary truce in the same house. He left without another word. The drive to the Redeemed Souls Community Chapel was his decompression chamber. He would play the music of Chief Osita Osadebe, letting the gentle high life rhythms wash over him, cleansing the residue of his wife's contempt. The church was a simple, unassuming building, but inside it was alive. The community was a vibrant tapestry of Nigerian immigrants, Igbo, Yoruba, Hausa, who had rebuilt their lives in Atlanta. They were doctors, lawyers, business owners, and laborers. They came together on Sundays to remember who they were, to speak in their mother tongues, and to eat the food that tasted of home. Emeka always sat in the third row on the aisle. He participated quietly, his voice a low rumble in the hymns, his amen soft but sincere. He never stayed for the boisterous fellowship hour with his networking and gossip. The performance of it all exhausted him. Instead, he would wait until the main hall had mostly cleared and then slip into the small adjoining room where the church kitchen was. And that is where he met Mama Chidinma. Mama Chidinma was 76 years old, and she wore her age like a cloak of honor. Her face was a beautiful map of her life, each line a story of laughter, sorrow, and resilience. Her skin, the color of rich, dark earth after a cleansing rain, glowed with the vitality that defied her years. Her hair was a crown of silver and white, braided into a simple, elegant style. She wore no makeup, no jewelry save for a thin, worn wedding band, though her husband had passed into glory 10 years prior. Her hands, gnarled with arthritis, were never still. They were always washing, chopping, stirring, or serving. She was the unofficial queen of the church kitchen, the guardian of its flavors. Her specialty was ofe onugbu, a bitter leaf soup so perfectly balanced, so rich with cocoyam, stockfish, and dried meat that a single taste could transport a person straight back to their grandmother's kitchen in Onitsha. The first time she noticed Emeka, he was sitting on a folding chair in the corner of the fellowship hall long after most people had left. He was just sitting, watching the few remaining children chase each other, a look of profound loneliness on his face. He looked like a man starving for something food alone could not fix. The scent of the soup was the first thing that reached him. It was a complex aroma of earth and smoke and spices, a smell that anchored him to his own history. Then he saw her standing before him. She held a steaming bowl of ofe onugbu and a perfectly rounded portion of fufu. "My son," she said, her voice warm and kind, with the thick musical accent of the Igbo heartland. "You have not eaten. Come. The Lord has provided." It was not a question. It was a gentle command, an invitation into a circle of care he had not realized he was outside of. Her words were simple, but they landed in his soul with the weight of a sacrament. The Lord has provided. He looked at her, this small, elderly woman with kindness radiating from her like heat from a hearth, and felt a stinging in the back of his eyes. "Thank you, Mama," he whispered, his voice thick. He took the bowl. The warmth seeped into his hands. He ate slowly, deliberately, each bite a communion. It was the most delicious thing he had ever tasted because it was seasoned with something he had been missing for years: unconditional kindness. From that day on, it became their ritual. He would attend the service, wait for the crowd to thin, and then go to the kitchen. Mama Chidinma would always have a plate for him, saved and kept warm. They rarely spoke much. She would ask about his week, and he would give simple, truthful answers. He never spoke of his wife or his loneliness, and she never pried. She simply saw a man in need of nourishment, both for his body and his spirit, and she provided it. In that small, humble kitchen, surrounded by the clatter of pots and the smell of home, the silent billionaire found his only sanctuary. He felt seen, not for what he had or didn't have, but simply for who he was, a child of God, worthy of a hot meal. The weeks turned into months, and the chasm between Emeka's two lives grew wider. At home, he was a ghost, an object of Ngozi's escalating contempt. In the world, he was a titan of industry, making decisions that affected the GDP of entire nations. And on Sundays, in a small church kitchen, he was just Emeka, a man who was grateful for a bowl of soup. Ngozi's campaign of private dismantling became more brazen. She had long ago moved into the master guest suite, a vast room at the opposite end of their Buckhead mansion, a house Emeka had purchased for her years ago, hoping its grandeur would bring her peace, but which had only become her gilded fortress. He rarely slept there, preferring the simplicity of his Decatur apartment, but he would visit, trying to maintain the facade of their marriage. These visits were her theater of cruelty. One evening, he came by to discuss a family matter, a cousin in Nigeria who needed help with school fees. He found Ngozi in the formal dining room with two of her friends, women who mirrored her own lacquered perfection. They were sipping champagne and laughing loudly. "Emeka, darling," she cooed, her voice dripping with saccharine poison for the benefit of her audience. "Come, join us. We were just talking about successful men." He stood in the doorway, feeling like an intruder in his own home. He was dressed in simple chinos and a polo shirt. They were dressed for a magazine cover. "Good evening," he said, nodding to her friends. "Ngozi, may I have a word? Anything you have to say can be said in front of my dear friends," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "Don't be shy." One of her friends, a woman named Funka, looked him up and down with a critical eye. "Ngozi, your husband is so humble," she said, and the word humble sounded like an insult. "Oh, he is the king of humility," Ngozi laughed, a brittle, ugly sound. "He has turned it into an art form. While other men are closing deals, my Emeka is consulting. On what? We are never quite sure. It's a great mystery." She turned her gaze on him, her eyes hard. "Did you bring the money for the caterer for my charity gala?" "I transferred it this morning," he said quietly. It was $85,000 for a single evening of performative charity, an event designed more to glorify Ngozi than to help anyone in need. "Good," she sniffed. At least you are useful for something. The friends tittered, and Emeka felt the familiar sting of shame. It was a public humiliation cloaked in the language of marital banter. He simply nodded, stated his message about the cousin's school fees, which Ngozi dismissed as a problem for another day, and left. As he walked out, he heard her say to her friends, "You see what I have to manage? It is a full-time job, being married to a man with no ambition, a complete and utter failure." This was the rhythm of his life: private contempt from his wife, quiet dignity from a church mother. One tore him down, the other built him up, one bowl of soup at a time. One Sunday, as he was finishing his meal, he found the courage to speak more openly with Mama Chidinma. He felt a deep weariness in his bones that day, a sorrow that even her soup could not entirely soothe. "Mama," he began, swirling the last of the broth in his bowl, "is it possible for a man to have everything and yet have nothing at all?" She stopped wiping the counter and looked at him, her eyes full of a deep, ancient wisdom. She had seen this story before, in many forms. She sat down opposite him, her hands resting on the table. "Emeka, my son," she said gently, "let me tell you something my grandmother told me. The hen that crows at dawn does not own the morning." He looked at her, puzzled. She smiled. "The one who makes the most noise, the one who puffs out their chest and announces their own importance. They are just a hen. They make a lot of noise, but the sun rises without their permission. The morning belongs to God. True power, true ownership is not in the crowing. It is in the quiet work of the sun. It is silent, it is steady, it is faithful. It gives light and warmth to everyone without asking for applause." She reached across the table and patted his hand. Her touch was warm and dry, a blessing. "Do not worry about the crowing of hens, my son. Just be the sun." The proverb settled deep in his spirit. A hen that crows at dawn. It was a perfect picture of Ngozi. All noise, all performance, all announcement. But the morning belonged to God. The real work was silent. It was steady. It was faithful. For the first time in a long time, he felt a flicker of strength, a sense of his own worth that was independent of his wife's validation or the number in his bank account. The final confrontation came on a Saturday night, the eve of the fateful Sunday. Ngozi was in a fury. A table she had reserved at a prestigious Atlanta restaurant had been given away. A minor inconvenience she had inflated into a catastrophic personal insult. She stormed through the Buckhead mansion, her rage a palpable force. Emeka, who had come to drop off some documents, became the target of her storm. "This is your fault," she shrieked, throwing a velvet cushion across the cavernous living room. "Everything in my life that is second-rate and disappointing is because of you." "Ngozi, it was a restaurant reservation," he said, his voice calm, trying to de-escalate. "It is not about the reservation," she screamed, her face contorted with a rage that was terrifying in its intensity. "It is about the fact that I am married to a nobody, a nothing. If you were Chief Adebayo, they would have held that table all night. If you were Mr. Nwosu, the owner himself would have called to apologize. But you are Emeka Okoro, the invisible man, the professional failure. I have wasted my life, my beauty, my youth, propping up a hollow man. You are worthless. Do you hear me? Utterly and completely worthless." She stood before him, panting, her chest heaving. The word, her ultimate weapon, had been deployed. Worthless. He looked at her, and for the first time, he felt nothing. No pain, no sorrow, just a vast, empty distance. The final thread that had connected them had just been severed. He had been a fool to keep trying. He turned and walked out of the house without a word, the sound of her frustrated scream echoing behind him. He knew then that it was over. The performance had reached its final ugly act. The next 3 Sundays were a test of faith, though Emeka did not know it. The church was facing a financial shortfall. The food pantry they relied on for their weekly fellowship meals had experienced a disruption in its supply chain. The kitchen, once a place of abundance, was now a place of careful rationing. On the first of these Sundays, Emeka arrived at the kitchen to find the usual joyous chaos replaced by a tense quiet. Mama Chidinma was standing over a single small pot of ofe onugbu. Her brow was furrowed with worry. She had served a small ladleful to each person, and now there was only one portion left. One proper, full, dignified portion. It was the one she had set aside for herself, her only meal for the day. She saw Emeka walk in, his face etched with the weariness of the previous night's battle. He looked more defeated than she had ever seen him. He did not even approach the counter, not wanting to be a burden. He simply sat in his usual corner, his head bowed. Mama Chidinma looked at the bowl in her hand. Her stomach rumbled. She was 76 years old. She needed her strength. Then she looked at Emeka. She saw not just a man, but the son of the community, a spirit in need of lifting. Her own hunger felt small in comparison to his visible pain. With a silent prayer, she made her decision. She walked over to him, her steps slow and deliberate. She placed the steaming bowl and the fufu in front of him. "My son," she said, her voice even warmer than usual. "Come and eat. The Lord has provided." He looked up, his eyes wide with surprise. "Mama, no. I saw the line. There is not enough. You must eat. There is always enough when you share," she said, pressing the bowl gently into his hands. "Eat. It will do my heart good to see you enjoy it." He could not refuse. The gesture was too powerful, too sacred. He ate the soup, and it felt like he was consuming pure love, pure grace. He did not know it was her last portion, but he knew on a spiritual level that he had just received a profound gift. That night, Mama Chidinma went home and drank a cup of hot water for her dinner, her heart full. The next Sunday, the situation was the same. The delivery had not come. Again, Mama Chidinma used her own small pension money to buy a few ingredients, making just enough to give everyone a taste. And again, she saved one proper portion for herself. And again, she saw Emeka, who seemed to be carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. He tried to refuse more forcefully this time, his voice full of concern for her. "Mama, please, I cannot take your food." "Hush, my son," she said, her authority gentle but absolute. "It is not my food to give. It is God's, and he has told me it is for you." She watched him eat, her spirit satisfied, even as her body was hungry. She saw the act not as a sacrifice, but as an investment in a human soul. The third Sunday arrived. It was the day the hen would crow at dawn. The kitchen was almost bare. Mama Chidinma had brought the last of the cocoyam and bitter leaf from her own small garden at home. She made one small, precious pot of ofe onugbu. It was enough for maybe 10 small servings. She painstakingly served the elders and the children first. When the maker arrived, there was nothing left but the scrapings in the pot. But he did not know that, because on the counter, waiting for him, was a single, perfect steaming bowl of soup and a ball of fufu. Mama Chidinma had prepared this one first, before anyone else. She had set it aside, knowing he would come, knowing he would need it. This gift was not her leftovers, it was her first fruits. He walked to the counter, his heart heavy with the decision he knew he had to make after the service. He saw the bowl and broke down. The sheer, relentless, unmerited kindness of this woman in the face of his own profound domestic misery was too much to bear. Tears welled in his eyes. "Mama," he choked out, unable to say more. She simply patted his arm. "Eat, Emeka. Today, you need your strength. The Lord has provided." He ate the soup, the last sacrificial gift. And as the warm, nourishing broth filled his empty stomach, he felt a new strength course through him. Not the strength of a billionaire, but the strength of a man who knew he was loved. It was the armor he would need for the battle that was to come. He finished his meal, washed his bowl, and thanked Mama Chidinma with a look of profound gratitude. Then he walked back into the main sanctuary and sat down in his pew to wait. He knew Ngozi would not be able to resist a stage this perfect. The service began. The praise and worship music swelled, voices rising to the rafters. Emeka felt a strange calm settle over him. He was no longer afraid. Pastor John took the pulpit, his sermon a powerful message about truth and hypocrisy. He spoke of whited sepulchres, beautiful on the outside, but full of decay within. It was as if God himself had chosen the topic for the day. As the pastor began his closing prayer, it happened. The rustle, the standing figure, the collective gasp. Ngozi stood, a vision in emerald and gold, her face a mask of righteous indignation. Pastor, she began, her voice ringing with performative anguish, I cannot stay silent any longer. As a woman of God, I must speak my truth. Pastor John, startled, lowered his hands. Sister Ngozi, what is it? It is my husband, she declared, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at Emeka. The gesture was an accusation, an indictment. This man, who sits here every Sunday, pretending to be a devout Christian, I want this church, our community, to know the truth. This man is a failure. Murmurs rippled through the congregation. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This was not church business. This was a private matter being made brutally public. He is a ghost of a man. Ngozi's voice grew louder, feeding on the attention. He has no ambition, no drive, no success. He provides nothing. I have had to carry this family on my back with my own businesses, my own connections. I live a life of quiet desperation, married to a man who is content to be worthless. The word landed like a physical blow. Worthless. The same word she had used in the privacy of their home, now wielded as a public weapon. Emeka did not flinch. He sat perfectly still, his gaze fixed on the cross at the front of the church. He looked like a man made of stone. I have tried to inspire him, to push him, to make him into the man God intended him to be. But you cannot mold dust into a mountain. I wanted you all to know the burden I carry. I wanted you to know the truth behind the quiet man in the third row. She finished, her chest heaving, playing the part of the long-suffering, martyred wife to perfection. A heavy, shocked silence filled the church. No one knew what to do. Then another sound, the soft creak of the kitchen door. Mama Chidinma walked into the sanctuary. She had heard the shouting. She walked slowly, her back straight, her old Bible clutched in her hand. She stopped in the center aisle, a few feet from Ngozi. Ngozi, my daughter, she said, her voice quiet but carrying an undeniable authority. You are mistaken. Ngozi spun around, her face a mask of fury. And who are you to speak to me? The kitchen help? Go back to your pots and pans, old woman. The disrespect was shocking. A gasp went through the older members of the congregation. Mama Chidinma did not raise her voice. I may be an old woman who works in the kitchen, but my eyes, they still see, and my spirit, it still knows. I have seen this man you call a failure. I have seen him come to this church every Sunday, without fail, to seek the face of God. I have seen him sit in silence, praying while others are gossiping. I have seen the goodness in his heart. You say he provides nothing? You are wrong. A man is not what is in his pocket. A man is what is in his heart. And the heart of Emeka Okoro is full of riches you cannot see. What riches? Ngozi scoffed, laughing cruelly. The riches of his 10-year-old Camry? The riches of his tired old shirts? You are a foolish old woman who knows nothing of the world. Mama Chidinma smiled a sad, gentle smile. The hen that crows at dawn does not own the morning, she said softly, more to herself than to Ngozi. It was then that Pastor John, moved by an impulse he would later describe as a direct instruction from the Holy Spirit, walked down from the pulpit. He walked past Ngozi, past Mama Chidinma, and straight to the third row. He stood before the silent, still figure of Emeka. He held out the cordless microphone. Brother Emeka, the pastor said, his voice resonating with a new gravity. The house of God is a house of truth. Do you have anything to say? Emeka looked up at the pastor. He took the microphone. His hand was steady. He stood up slowly. As he rose, it was as if he grew in stature. The quiet, simple man seemed to fill the space, his presence suddenly immense, commanding. The air crackled with anticipation. He clicked the microphone on. The small sound echoed in the silent church. Good morning, everyone, he began, his voice a calm, deep baritone, devoid of anger or self-pity. It was a voice of quiet power, a voice no one in that room, save perhaps Mama Chidinma, had ever truly heard. My wife, Ngozi, is not entirely wrong, he said. The congregation gasped. Ngozi smirked, a look of vindicated triumph on her face. In her world, by her measure, I am a failure. I have failed to be loud. I have failed to be flashy. I have failed to value the things she values. For this, I am truly sorry that I could not be the husband she wanted. He paused, letting the words settle. But I was taught to measure a man differently. I was taught by my father and by mothers in this very church that a man's worth is in what he builds, not what he shows. It is in the foundations, not the facade. He turned his eyes to Mama Chidinma, who was watching him with tears glistening in her own. For months, I have been nourished in this church, not just by the word, but by the hands of Mama Chidinma. When my spirit was low, she fed me. When the church had little, she gave me her own portion. Not once, but 3 times. She gave from her lack, not her abundance. She did not know who I was, what I had, or what I did not have. She only saw a brother in need. That, my friends, is the true measure of wealth. He then looked directly at Ngozi, whose smirk was beginning to falter, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. Ngozi, you are right. I am a consultant. I consult on the building of things. For the past 2 years, I have been consulting on a project very close to my heart. A project here, for this community. He turned to Pastor John. Pastor, you have been praying for a new building, a place big enough for our growing congregation, a place with a real kitchen, a community hall for our children, a learning center to teach our youth financial literacy and coding, and a fund to provide scholarships for every child in this church to go to university. Pastor John's eyes widened. This was the exact secret prayer of the Board of Elders. Well, Pastor, Emeka continued, his voice ringing with quiet authority, the Lord has heard your prayer, and he has provided. He reached into his simple jacket pocket and pulled out a set of architectural plans and a thick portfolio. He handed them to the stunned pastor. The land has been purchased. The plans have been approved. The financing has been secured, all 100% of it. The groundbreaking for the new 1,500-seat Redeemed Souls Community Chapel and Empowerment Center will be next month. It is a gift from my family foundation to the community that has been my sanctuary. Silence. A stunned, absolute, disbelieving silence. Then Pastor John, his hands trembling, opened the portfolio. His eyes scanned the first page. He looked up, his face a mask of awe. The Okoro Foundation, a donation of $50 million. The collective gasp was like a wind rushing through the church. $50 million. Ngozi's face collapsed. The color drained from it, leaving her expensive foundation looking like a chalky mask. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The Chanel bag slipped from her grasp and hit the floor with a soft, expensive thud. The hen had crowed, but the sun had just risen and its light was blinding. Emeka's voice softened. There is one condition to this gift, he said, that the new community kitchen be named Mama Chidinma's Kitchen and that she be appointed as a founding elder for life on the new church council to ensure we never forget that our true mission is to feed the hungry in body and in spirit. He looked at the old woman who was now weeping openly, tears of joy streaming down her beautiful wrinkled face. Mama, he said, his voice thick with emotion, the Lord has provided. And with that, the church erupted. The silence broke into a tidal wave of cheering, shouting, and applause that went on and on. People were on their feet, hugging, crying. It was a moment of pure, cathartic joy. In the chaos, no one at first noticed Ngozi. She didn't scream. She didn't faint. She simply deflated. The proud, rigid posture was gone. The performative beauty had melted away, revealing a woman who was hollow, lost, and utterly broken. She stumbled backward, turned, and fled out the side door of the church, her Louboutin heels clicking a frantic, lonely rhythm on the pavement. She had gotten what she wanted. Everyone knew the truth now, just not her version of it. Months passed. The old church was demolished, and a magnificent new structure rose in its place. Emeka, no longer silent, oversaw every detail, not as a distant billionaire, but as a brother, often with a hammer in his hand, working alongside the construction crews. He filed for divorce. Ngozi took a settlement generous, but a fraction of what she could have had, and vanished from the Atlanta social scene. One cool evening, about a year later, the new community kitchen was having its grand opening, serving a free meal to anyone in need. The kitchen was state of the art, a gleaming cathedral of stainless steel and efficiency, but the smell was timeless. Ofe onugbu, rich and fragrant, simmering in a massive pot. A woman stood hesitantly in the line, her head covered with a simple scarf. She was thinner, her face bare of makeup, her clothes clean but simple. It was Ngozi. Life had humbled her. Her businesses had failed without Emeka's silent backing. Her fair weather friends had disappeared, and she now worked a simple administrative job, living in a small apartment. She finally reached the front of the line. The woman serving the soup looked up, her eyes full of wisdom and warmth. It was Mama Chidinma. Their eyes met. For a moment, the world stood still. There was no judgment in Mama's gaze, only a deep, abiding compassion. Ngozi looked down, her shoulders shaking, ashamed to even be there. Mama Chidinma ladled a generous portion of the steaming soup into a bowl. She added a perfectly round ball of fufu. She walked around the counter and came to where Ngozi stood, trembling. She held out the bowl. "My daughter," Mama Chidinma said, her voice soft and full of grace, the sacred callback words echoing with a new, profound meaning. "Come and eat. The Lord has provided." Ngozi took the bowl, and a single hot tear fell from her eye, sizzling in the hot soup. She broke down, not with the performative rage of her old life, but with the quiet, cleansing tears of a woman who had lost everything, and in that moment was being given the one thing she never deserved: forgiveness. The closing image of our story is not one of grandeur, but of quiet service. In the vast new kitchen named in her honor, Mama Chidinma stands over a bubbling pot of ofe onugbu, stirring with a long wooden spoon. The scent of home and hope fills the air. Beside her, dressed in a simple apron, is Emeka. He is not a billionaire, not a philanthropist, not a king of infrastructure. He is just a man, a son, quietly washing vegetables, his face peaceful and content. They work in comfortable silence, a portrait of grace rewarded and humility restored. He found his family not in a mansion, but in a kitchen. He found his voice not in anger, but in gratitude. Every tale has a lesson, and our channel never forgets. The hen that crows at dawn does not own the morning. The loudest voice in the room is rarely the most powerful. True strength is quiet, true wealth is in the giving, and a single act of kindness, a simple bowl of soup, can be enough to build a kingdom.